Yo, what is up guys? It is Bumfris, back with episode 84 of our Reddit series. This one's going to be a little bit more entitled parents, and I know you're going to love this one. Make sure to stick around to the end because these stories are awesome and they're pretty long as well, which you guys have told me you love to listen to. So, do both me and yourself a favor and sit back, relax, and get annoyed at some entitled parents. Years ago, this new neighbour of mine who had recently moved to a house on the next street over kept trying for the better part of a summer to use me as a free babysitter. It started when her kid, who was a really cute, well-behaved about 7-year-old, showed up at my door at about 7:15 in the morning. We were all just waking up and getting around, so I told him that my boys weren't ready to play yet and to come back in a few hours. That is when the kid told me that his mum had gone to work. This seemed a bit odd to me, so I brought him in and tried to call his mum. This was the time of only landlines, and sure enough, she was gone. So I brought him in and fed him breakfast. He stayed with us for the rest of the day, and he got along well with my two boys, who were 5 and 10. I had only talked to his mum about 2 times, so I had no idea why she would think this was a good idea. When his mum came home, I walked him over so I could talk to her. I told her not to do that again, and I told her that I would be willing to watch him on occasions if asked first, but not every day. Her response was, well, what else do you have to do all day? This kind of took me by surprise. I tried to tell her that I work at home on commissions, and she rolled her eyes and told me that being an artist isn't a real job. And besides, I was married, so I didn't need to work. I should have pointed out to her that she was married and working, but I felt myself getting angry and didn't want to argue with her. Just don't do it again, I said to her. You have teenage kids home for the summer, have them babysit. She frowned at me and said, they work. And I said, so do I. Then I went home. The next morning at 7:15, the kids sheepishly showed up again. Once again, I bring him in and feed him breakfast and later lunch. I took him to his home and once again told his mother to please not do that again. She actually tried to tell me that it was my neighborhoodly duty to watch him, and I told her that if she sent him tomorrow, I wouldn't be there because of a doctor's appointment. She said that as her babysitter, I should have given her several days notice about this, and I angrily told her that I was not a babysitter and then went home. The next morning, I made my 7 AM appointment, blood work, that's why it was so early, and I did some grocery shopping afterwards, and it was about 10 AM when I got home. The poor kid was waiting for me on my porch. He'd been there for nearly 3 hours, and the little guy was scared and hungry. That night when I took him home, I was angry. I told her how the kid was scared and alone, and she actually said that she told me that I hadn't given her enough time to find anyone else, and that this being alone was my fault. I pointed at her and said, I am not a babysitter. Don't send him over again. That night, this woman had her adult nephew call me to scream at me for not being home when his poor aunt dropped her son off. How dare I leave a small child alone like that? I told the nephew that this aunt knew I wasn't home, so it was her that left the child all alone. I said that I'd repeatedly asked his aunt not to send the kid over anymore, and I was not a babysitter. This nephew freaked out at me when I said that, and I hung up on him screaming at me. This worked for 2 wonderful quiet days. Then, right back to it. I tried everything, but this woman insisted that it was my neighborly duty to babysit and would tell me just as much. Finally, I decided that to solve the problem, I would just get a job outside of my home and that she would have to stop. I was too much of a pacifist back then, and I no longer am. I landed an interview for a position at the local library, and I was ecstatic. I told the woman to keep her son home because I'd arranged for my kids to stay with their grandmother while I went to this interview. The next morning, I drove to my mother-in-law's house and took my kids inside. When I went to leave, I found this woman's kid waiting in my car. She had actually followed me there and put her son in my unlocked car and then zoomed off while I was dropping off my boys. My mother-in-law wasn't the most flexible person in the world, and she adamantly refused to watch an extra kid. I had to cancel my interview and I was livid. I toyed with several ideas at this moment. I could take the kid to her job and leave him with her, or I could call the police and the CPS. I really wasn't sure how stable this woman's job was, and I didn't want to get her fired. And then when I went to call the CPS, I chickened out because it really wouldn't be fair to this little boy. Besides, I had heard really scary stories about the CPS. In the end, I just waited for her to come home. I left the boy at my house with my hubby as I planned on doing a lot of cussing, and I stomped over to her house and met her before she even got out of her car. I shouted at her and told her that she was dense, stupid, moronic, and crazy. I told her that she'd lost me my job interview, and if she sent her kid over to be watched again, I was going to be calling the CPS and the police. I told her that she was violating my space, and if it took going to court to get her to knock it off, then so be it. She then put her hands on her hip and in the most snotty tone said, well, if you didn't want to sit with him, all you had to do was tell me. I really don't know how I kept myself from punching her right there and then. This comment was so asinine. I turned on my heels to start stomping home when I saw her husband pulling up. Now, this was the first time that I'd ever met her husband. He was at a job that only allowed him to be home on weekends, and I can't blame him. I wouldn't want to be around her either. But when she saw him, she turned tail and ran into the house. He saw that I was upset and asked me what had happened, and I told him. I told him all of it, especially the incident at my mother-in-law's. The poor man was shocked. He had been told that I was being paid, and he'd been giving her money to pay for me. He had no idea all of this had been going on and was very, very apologetic over the whole thing. In fact, he even apologized again to my husband when he came over to pick up his little boy. Finally, she stopped sending her kid over. Later on, I heard from others that she was bad-mouthing me and warning folks about what a horrid babysitter I was, but I took that as a favor. I didn't want to babysit any kids other than my own, and I still hate doing so. I don't hate the kids, I love kids. It's dealing with the parents that I don't like. The kid came over once in a while after that to play with my kids after he called first to get permission. Exactly the way it should be done. I'm sure his dad had something to do with that because the kid only came over on the weekends. This is one of a few stories I have involving this crazy lady, as her only entertainment in life seems to be seeing how bizarre she can act in this neighborhood. I'm luckier than my other neighbors in the fact that she leaves me alone now, and I'm very happy with that. This takes me like so far back to the days of the Choosing Beggars episodes that we used to do, where there were so many people thinking that they deserve babysitters for like $10 a day and the most ridiculous things ever, but this takes it to a new level. I'm noticing a bit of a trend where entitled parents are basically just choosing beggars who are now parents, so their entire life they were choosing beggars. They have a child and all of a sudden, new subreddit for you. Like, it's win-win for us, right? I lived alone with my mother in Ohio since my dad left when I was in middle school, save for 2013 for 2015. I'm now 24 and I recently admitted to myself that she's been getting worse and worse and I have to leave. This past January, I packed my bags and brought a one-way plane ticket to Florida where my boyfriend is. Guess who followed me? By pure coincidence, her boyfriend lived less than 2 hours drive from mine. Unsurprisingly, however, he bailed soon after meeting her. So now she's homeless and an easy drive away. Living out of a car, working a dead-end retail job that she's had since 2011. She was going to keep our cat because her boyfriend was going to house them both. So of course, I ended up with it while I was staying with my boyfriend's parents. Miracle that they allowed it. The following is what she told me, but I can't assume that it's true. After boyfriend 1 bailed, she'd been using Tinder and found a guy that she instantly clicked with. He's a journalist/politician cartoonist from Egypt. A political refugee in the process of naturalization, with almost all of his money inaccessible back home with his brother. She shared an apartment with a roommate who moved elsewhere, but his son is staying there, and due to their Arabic culture, he's basically forbidden from letting a woman stay in the house lest he face blackmail from the roommate. She needs a Florida ID to apply for some new jobs, which is weird because I got a job here with my old ID, and needs a mailing address to get one. Her boyfriend insists that her family, being me, provides an address, which is another cultural thing, even though apparently this man is also expected to provide for the women, but my place is just not mine and I can't risk her moving in or being convicted of postal fraud. Yet, she will not stop badgering me for my address no matter how many times I say no. Now she's even saying that her boyfriend doesn't have an address because he cancelled his lease without having another place lined up. Today is my boyfriend's birthday and now all I'm worried about is how to deal with my mum. She's the reason that I nearly couldn't get a lease and I had co-signed our last place, so apparently my rent history says it was left/torn apart and they're 3 months behind on rent. Rent wasn't behind by the time I left and she was only there another month, so I have no idea how she did that. She also never cancelled the utilities. She had also completely drained any savings I had by forcing me to pay the whole rent every month while she ate McDonald's 3 to 4 times a day. I wish I was exaggerating. No one in her family will take her either because she's completely alienated them. You know, sometimes we have parents that really fit the mold of entitled parents really well, and then other times we have parents who are just really bad parents, and in this case, I feel like this mother's just a bad parent. The weirdest thing about it is, I don't even know what her angle really was here. Did she just want to know where her daughter lives so she could hunt her down and try and cause more trouble for her, or did she really need somewhere to stay? I don't know, but just sounds like she's not a very good parent, full stop. So for some backstory, this was about 13 years ago when I was a kid. I grew up with my grandma living with us since she had cancer and needed support. She was my best friend growing up and more of a mother than my mum will ever be. I love this woman with all my heart and was inseparable. But as I mentioned, she had cancer and she'd finally reached the end stage after all these years. So we called in my mum's brother and their families to come say their goodbyes and be here for the funeral, so we let them stay with us in our home, which is why this happened. So it was a nice day in October and the weather was nice. So Entitled Kid 1 and 2 wanted to go out and play in our above ground pool. I went out in the backyard to play with them and the other cousins. Entitled Kid 1 was trying to drown one of the nice kids and Entitled Kid 2 was flapping aimlessly with water wings. I was just trying to adjust my eyes to the water as I wasn't using goggles since a lot of kids and not enough pairs, and all the while Entitled Mum was supposed to be watching us. I didn't have much faith in Entitled Mum helping anyone but herself since she was apathetic the whole time I knew her. There was always somewhere else she'd rather be, so naturally my suspicions proved correct as she vanished from the back porch. I ended up getting dunked under the water by Entitled Kid 1 and took in water, so I was gagging and coughing when I resurfaced and hadn't noticed that the Entitled Mum was suddenly right in front of me standing outside the pool with a bland expression and without even checking if I was okay, told me she's gone. I'm still catching my breath, not realizing what she's saying, and I ask her, "What do you mean?" The Entitled Mum rephrased, "Granny's gone," with the same emotionless tone. Panicking, I rushed out of the pool to dry myself without a word to anyone and ran to my grandmother's bedroom. I'll never forget that moment. My family was at her bedside crying, and I, without a word, came to her bedside and held her in my arms for one last hug as the emotions finally poured out of me. My best friend and the woman who taught me so much in the past 10 years was gone. I don't know how long I stayed, and I remember not wanting to let her go because of the feeling of regret of not being there sooner before she passed. When I came out of the room, the cousins and my uncles all came in and we grieved together, mourning our loss. But then, something odd happened. I noticed that the Entitled Mum wasn't with us, so my uncle went looking and found her packing things already. When he asked what she was doing, she said, "Well, it's over, isn't it? She's dead. Now we can go home." Everyone was in shock. The disrespect that oozed out of her mouth as she's trying to tell the kids to get their things together, saying that we can finally get out of this crap show and back home where it's quiet. My mum and her brothers took her into another room and laid the hell into her. She was kicked out right there, but the Entitled Kid stayed with us. A few days later, we had the funeral, and it wasn't until my mum was by her casket that she noticed that she looked as if she died from asphyxiation, not the cancer. We then realized why my aunt had been acting odd and she was trying to leave so quickly. She had smothered my grandma so that she could get herself and her bratty kids home. We never had an investigation as we didn't have any proof, but my uncle divorced her and she won the Entitled Kids. Thank God we didn't have to deal with them anymore, and has been a ghost ever since. But we assume that the trailer rat didn't have the most enjoyable time since my uncle, who was an admitted deadbeat, never paid his child support payments. It still sickens me to this day to know that the kindest woman I know was potentially murdered. This could just be me, but a story like this literally makes me feel physically sick. This was almost to the point where I was considering not posting this just because of how horrible this story is with the entitled parent. The thing is though, I think it's important that we share these kinds of stories because it shows just how bad entitled parents can be and how careful you need to be around them. And you know, this person could be completely wrong, but if not, and this is exactly how it panned out, this is by far the worst case of an entitled parent that I've ever heard, and a straight up murderer. Yeah, I don't know, this one's just gone too far, and I really wish that there's still an investigation because this person needs to be held accountable. Alright everyone, that is that for today's episode of Entitled Parents. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm just going to take a second to plug a couple of my social medias, including our Discord server. I do have a Twitter and an Instagram if you want to follow me on both of those. They are both at Bumfris, and feel free to send me a message and I'll do my best to respond. I also just want to take a second to say thank you so much for all the love lately, all of the comments, the likes, the subscribers, just the fact that you guys tune in and watch my videos every day. It really does make my day. Every single one of you is the backbone of this channel and I really cannot express how much I appreciate that. Without you guys, this channel would be nothing, and I love making these videos for you guys and I love the fact that you enjoy them. So on that note, I will wrap things up for today's episode of Entitled Parents. I just want to take a second again to say thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I'll see you all in the next episode of Entitled Parents. Bye.